Good evening. I'd like to call the October 4, 2021 meeting of the University Heights City Council to order. Mrs. Thomas, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Blanco?
Here.
Mrs. Beery?
Here.
Mrs. Pardee?
Here.
Mrs. White?
Here.
Mr. Ertl?
Here.
Mr. Rock? Mr. Gould?
Here. Okay, before I ask for the motion, we have these new microphones, so if folks could move them down towards them so they can be recorded as well as heard by folks in the gallery. And we have monitors up here where we can hear each other. So, Mrs. Thomas, you may want to adjust yours as well. That said, is there a motion to excuse Mr. Rock from the meeting this evening?
Also move, Mayor.
Okay, motion by Mrs. Blankfeld. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Gould. Any discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Blanco?
Aye.
Mrs. Beery?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Ertl?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Okay. Mr. Rock is excused. Will all those who are able please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Okay, next item on the agenda is approval of minutes. Mrs. Thomas, do we have minutes?
They have minutes from June 21st and from June 28th.
June 23rd and, I'm sorry, could you use your microphone? I can't hear you.
June 21st and June 28th.
Are they in the packet? I don't see them.
They were in the Dropbox.
Okay.
I didn't see
If folks haven't seen them, we could table them.
Mayor, I'd make a motion to table the minutes until the next meeting.
Okay, we have a motion to table the minutes to the next meeting. Is by Mr. Gould. Is there a second?
I'll second, Mayor.
Okay, second by Mrs. Pardee.
Okay.
Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Blanco?
Aye.
Mrs. Beery?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Ertl?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Motion carries. Minutes are tabled till the next meeting. Next item is comments from the audience. Speakers are limited to 5 minutes. Total time allowed is 15 minutes per meeting unless otherwise permitted by council under Ordinance 91-25. We do have a microphone to take up to the podium. If there's anybody here who would like to address the city this evening, I think I see Mr. Wertheim. If you would come up to the podium, we'll bring a microphone and you'll have 5 minutes. If you could state your name and address for the record first, please.
I'm Steve Wertheim. I've lived for 35 years at 4355 Baintree. And I am here, as I pull out my notes, on behalf of Reaching Heights. One of my duties as the token University Heights representative on Reaching Heights is to go to council meetings, which was a lot easier when we were Zooming. Anyway, I've said that all right. Just to tell you, Reaching Heights is an organization that supports the Heights schools. I just want to give you a few updates. 50 Heights students were named Advanced Placement Scholars. An additional 12 Heights students were named AP Scholars with Honors. These are national honors, by the way. And 8 were named AP Scholars with distinctions, earning 3.5 or better on at least 5 AP tests. It's also important to note that the school system has completed its strategic plan 2026. There are 5 areas of focus: student outcomes, educational approach, families and communities, valued professionals and culture of excellence, and operational resources. You can review the plan and the processes that went through to get to the plan at chuh.org. Reaching Heights also sponsors a program called Many Villages, in which volunteers spend at least a couple hours a week tutoring children in our elementary schools who may need one-on-one assistance, especially after a year away from school during COVID. Joshua Mendel, he's not a University Heights resident, is a coordinator of tutors at Garrity Elementary School, where I tutor. We work in conjunction with the kindergarten, first, and second grade teachers. The coordinator will train you, but you need not worry. The reading and/or education games are simple to follow. We tutor from 1 to 3, Monday through Thursday. You can tutor for 1 day or as many days as you are comfortable handling. Each session is about 15 minutes per child. This is my second year tutoring, and I get more out of it than I've put in. The students and teachers really appreciate the tutors. And if you want more information about this, you can go to Reaching Heights.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wertheim. Okay, Mr. Miller, if you would state your name and address for the record, you may have up to 5 minutes.
The name is Paul Miller. I live at 2370 Charney Road. I've lived here for 43 years. And for those people who were at the firehouse this Sunday, you know what you experienced. For those who don't, I'll be very brief, which I'm usually not, but I will be very brief. It was a wonderful, absolutely wonderful day. We really should commend our fire. Every person who works at that fire department, and I spoke to a number of them, and I've gotten to know a number of them over the years, they're just solid people. They're really an asset to our community. On Sunday, I've never seen so many kids in all my life at a fire station. They were just droves of them, and they're all having a wonderful time. And I just wanted to say thank you to them from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Is there anybody else who would like to address the city this evening? I see Mrs. Hubman. If somebody could bring her the microphone, please.
Hello, my name is Sheila Hubman. My husband and I live at 2528 Ashurst since April the 5th, 1965. I think I heard last meeting that the scooters are going to be on the street and helmets are not required. I don't know if I'm right or not, but this is why I've come. I'm talking about University Square. I don't think that the city should be involved in land deals with private concerns. We could stay out of it. I don't understand why there's such a push. I'm not clear. Does anybody on the council have a investment in the companies? Or are they your cousin, or your friend, or your best man? We should stay out of the deal between May Company and whoever they're working with. I certainly, Macy's, it's Macy's, I'm sorry. I certainly don't want to lose that store. We need it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Hubman.
Mayor,
Yes,
may I
Mr.
reply
Gold.
briefly?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Ms. Hubman, I certainly have no interest in the property, and we've had several conversations as a council with the administration. The mayor has kept us up to date with what's happening. The issue that, as I see it, is not one of losing the store. The issue is losing the property altogether. If there is an agreement reached with Macy's, we may lose each and every one of the apartment complexes or apartments that were planned to be built. We might lose the parking garage. We could lose Target. The entire University Square could fall into disrepair, and we could lose several businesses and the opportunity for the future. So that's my personal view. And so if you hear me pressing or making statements, as I did at the last meeting, suggesting that the mayor's and law director's perspective and position regarding the appraisals that were necessary as the first step, if ever we were to move to an eminent domain process, it is because I believe that property is so essential to the well-being of the city's future not my personal interest. So your suggestion that, or question whether or not I have any interest in them, I don't. In fact, you may recall that I voted against a portion of the square, or at least questioned the developers at the time that they brought that issue, because they wanted us to place inside of the deed an area or a requirement that payday lenders be allowed at the location, not as a deed restriction. So I had issue with that and called them about that, or talked to them about that. But up until that point, that's the only interaction that I've had with a developer. So thank you, Mayor, for the opportunity.
You're welcome, Mr. Gould. Thank you. Is there anybody else who wanted to address this point? Okay. Is there anybody else who would care to address the city this evening? All right. Seeing none, we will move then to the next item on the agenda, which is reports and communications from the mayor and the taking of action. Next Monday is Columbus Day, or as we call it here in University Heights, Monday. This coming Monday is not a holiday in our city. Rubbish pickup will be on a regular schedule. Last week, I did sign the temporary and emergency labor contract with Minutemen Staffing, approved by council at the last meeting. We anticipate having our typical complement of temp workers to assist our regular service staff in the raking of tree lawn leaves. Please remember that tree lawn raking is a seasonal and not weekly service. Residents are always welcome to bag their leaves in craft bags for city pickup on the regular rubbish day. These leaves are composted. Our yard waste composting represents 24% of our overall solid waste pickup annually. If you bag your leaves, please put them in craft bags for composting and not in plastic bags for rubbish, or else they will not be composted. Finally, the Cuyahoga Soil and Water Conservation District would remind residents that leaves left in yards provide important winter protection for bees and other useful insects and invertebrates, and can also be mulched into your own yard and beds. As homeowners continue to embrace sustainability and better urban biodiversity, let's not forget the potential for biodiversity hidden within our leaves. As reported at the last meeting, the City of University Heights is working with the Cleveland Heights University Heights School District to find ways to make our community assets work better for our shared constituents. This meeting room is one of those efforts. Tomorrow, I will be addressing the community at the school board meeting on the joint effort the city and school district made as an aside to the ongoing facilities study, and aspire to keep making, regarding the ongoing review of additional uses we might make at this site, the former Wiley Middle School property. As previously reported, our consultants concluded that the city service yard could be relocated to this site, even as the bus depot is potentially returned to this site. The issue of the bus depot will be on Thursday evening's City Planning Commission agenda. In my view, it isn't a question of whether we should move the city service yard to Wiley, but whether, in addition to that, there are other and further ways we can work together regarding uses of this site. At the next City Council meeting, I anticipate providing an update on the municipal facilities study. The focus of that study has been the 2300 Warrensville Center Road site, which must be fully reviewed and considered as an initial matter, and from which the issue of the desirability of moving the service yard originated. More on this at the next City Council meeting. As for tomorrow's school board meeting, as the spirit of cooperation continues, due to the high school auditorium being engaged in a theater production, and that's where the school board has been meeting, the school board meeting will be here in this room, in the city's new meeting room here at Wiley. This evening, I would like to announce 2 appointments on the Technology Advisory Commission to replace the vacancy of chair. The new chairs of the commission will be existing commission members Christine Hudak and Jang Kwan. By ordinance, we should reopen and reappoint the commission members following next month's municipal election. We anticipate at this time that Hudak and Kwan will serve in a partnership capacity at chair into the new year. Related to this, you will see on tonight's agenda a quote extending IT services with Starfish through the end of the year. The city anticipates a report and presentation from Paul Hugenberg of Ray and Associates at our next city council meeting on their technology assessment of our city's IT needs. Finally, the University Heights Fall Fest is this Sunday from 1 to 5 p.m. at Walter Stinson Community Park. More on the event details later in the Community Engagement Report. The second annual Fall Fest is our city's answer to the Harvest Festivals ubiquitous to the more rural communities of northeastern Ohio. While we have no farms in our city limits, no locally themed crop to celebrate like maple syrup in Chardon or grapes in Geneva, the spirit of the season, the fall flavors and festivity will be present for the University Heights Fall Fest. Most of all, we will have the community togetherness that a festival brings, together with over 50 artists and vendors, circus performers, live music, and more. More details later this evening in Mike Cook's report. And thank you. This concludes my report. Turning to the agenda, item A is Ordinance 2021-38, creating a pilot program for the use of electronic scooters on city streets and authorizing the mayor to enter into a memorandum of understanding with Cuyahoga County, Ohio, establishing certain rights and responsibilities for the electronic scooter pilot program and declaring an emergency, and this is on emergency. Mr. Engelbrecht, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Good evening. City Council, along with Luke McConville, worked to put together legislation to start an electronic scooter pilot program in the city. Some of the major points in the legislation include that the program on pilot would allow for 5 electronic scooters per vendor, which would come out to 20 total in the city, 20 scooters total. And that they would be allowed for use between 7 o'clock a.m. and 7 o'clock p.m., that they would be restricted to operation only along certain major thoroughfares, including Cedar, Fairmount, South Taylor, South Green, Warrensville, and Meadowbrook, and also be restricted to individuals who are aged 16 and over, and that they be limited to 15 miles per hour. These were all issues that were brought up during the council meeting of the whole, and they look to be all addressed within the legislation. Councilman Gould forwarded potential changes that he wanted to see to both Luke and myself. I would let Councilman Gould, along with Luke, comment on those potential changes. But as soon as the legislation is passed, Mike Foley of the county's Director of Sustainability said that within a week, scooters would be available for use from the folks who live in University Heights. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Engelbrecht. Do either Mr. McConville or Mr. Gould care to comment at this point?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Mayor. First off, just for council's benefit, the revised version of the ordinance incorporated a few comments made by Mr. Gould. Principally, the scope of the legislation was reduced so that it applies to electronic scooters or e-scooters only. The model legislation that had been developed through the county had a broader definition of shared mobility devices, and that definition was included with the idea that there may be additional types of electronic devices or vehicles that come online that become popular, and with that definition, councils wouldn't have to revisit the issue. But we wanted to, because this is a pilot program, we wanted to make it clear that we were confining it only to the scooters. So that is the crux of the revision to the ordinance. Other provisions of the ordinance that I think are worth noting for, as a reminder to council and for the general public, the ordinance limits the total number of licenses per vendor to 5. There are 4 vendors, so there would be a total of 20 scooters in the city. The ordinance includes the concept of what are known as rebalancing stations. Rebalancing stations are basically places to which the scooters shall be returned. There's a 3-hour limit for each of the vendors. Once a ride is up, they have 3 hours to get those scooters back to the rebalancing stations that are designated. That time period is the time period that the county has indicated the vendors are comfortable with. There are hours of operation limiting the operation from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Mr. Engelbrecht mentioned the speed limit. There's also an age limit. No person under the age of 16 can operate a scooter. And we also incorporate Chapter 432 of our codified ordinances, which essentially is bringing the rules of the road that apply to motor vehicles and applying them to the scooters so that someone who's operating a scooter in a reckless fashion or who's committing some other general garden variety traffic violation can be cited. With that, I would turn it over to Mr. Gould if he has additional comment, but one other thing that's worth noting is we do have a prohibition on operation of the scooters on sidewalks. The idea is that the scooters will be driven in the roadway and then returned to the sidewalk to be parked, and then picked up by the vendors and returned to the rebalancing stations. It is a pilot. It expires after a period of 6 months, at which time council would have to take affirmative action either to re-up the program, codify it, or discontinue it.
Thank you, Mr. McConville. Mr. Gould, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. The only thing that I mentioned before, which is not included in this version, is the limit on the private cause of action against citizens. The law director is doing some additional research on that point to see what authority we have to limit that. I'm comfortable with this for this short period of time for the program to go into effect because I wouldn't want to hold the gathering of the rest of the data for that one piece. I did have a question. I see in Section 8 that we still have Meadowbrook, but Mr. Engelbrecht, it does not appear that there are any rebalancing stations along Meadowbrook. Was there a certain analysis that you did or decision? What brought you to the decision that we would rebalance in place? We could operate on Meadowbrook, but we would be rebalancing in places that did not include Meadowbrook.
So the reason for Meadowbrook being left off, at least initially, was because of the street, even though it is used as a main thoroughfare, that it's still primarily residential. So my thought process was that if anybody wanted to pick up the scooters, they could go to where they are and pick them up at a rebalancing station, use them, and hopefully return them to the rebalancing stations. But that was my reasoning. Now, the places that were included initially on the map that I provided to council could be altered. So there would be the potential to add a place for rebalancing on Meadowbrook with your input.
That may be something to consider in future, depending on how well they're received and how their use or parking in residential areas affects people, because I understand the sensitivities around that, but I thought one of the things that we discussed with the benefit that could be for individuals who are along that street and down, at the lower parts of the hill. As it stands, they'll have to walk to Warrensville Center Road in order to get the scooter. That would be probably the closest location because it's the intersection of Warrensville and Meadowbrook. So thank you for that. That's all I have, Mayor.
Mayor, may I ask?
Oh, yes.
Mr.
Ms. Blankenship.
Engelbrecht,
Yes.
So the other rebalancing stations, as they're called, they are located in more public places.
Yes.
But if it were to be one somewhere along Meadowbrook that, as you stated, is purely residential, what would that look like?
I don't know, because I didn't, based on it being residential, I didn't want to consider it. But, you know, again, if council feels that Meadowbrook should have a station, a rebalancing station, it's something that could be added.
I think you'd have to talk to
The map isn't
residents
static.
first. Yeah.
Yeah. Map is not static, we can change it.
And as it stands, they won't be able to rebalance at every station because there are less scooters allowed per company than there are balancing stations. So we would have to raise it, as things are now, from 5 to 10 for each company to rebalance one scooter at each center. So I'm sure they'll simply make business decisions as to where they place them within the city. I'm sorry, Mayor, I didn't regain the floor from you. My apologies.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Thank you. Any further questions for Mr. Engelbrecht? Further comments? Mrs. Weiss?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of assure the residents that council has heard you. We received an email even as late as today. When the committee met, we realized that University Heights is unique as opposed to some other cities that have a lot more commercial and a lot less dense residential. So that's why we really made this a pilot, and we are going to look at the data and reevaluate and see if this works for our city. That's why we put that 6-month deadline.
Thank you, Mrs. Weiss.
One
Mr.
other-
Gould?
One other thing to the Vice Mayor's point, and something that she mentioned last time, to the residents, if we don't regulate this, meaning if we don't have a pilot program and then make some decision to either allow or disallow, there is no geofencing in University Heights. So right now, other than our toy ordinance statute that makes it illegal to ride a scooter on the street, there's nothing preventing somebody from riding one of these scooters from South Euclid right through University Heights on the sidewalk and parking it on the sidewalk. And there's no way for us to stop that unless we sign up for the program and red zone these areas, geofence these areas. I don't want to use red zoning or redlining, both of those have negative connotations. But geofence these areas so that we are now in control of scooter use in University Heights. So I think that was a good point that you made last time, Vice Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gould. Any further questions or comments? And if not, is there a motion? We would be looking for a motion to adopt on emergency.
Mayor, I'll make a motion to adopt the ordinance or pass the ordinance creating a pilot program for the use of electronic scooters on city streets and authorizing you to enter into a memorandum of understanding with Cuyahoga County establishing certain rights and responsibilities for an electronic scooter pilot program on emergency.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Gould, as said, on emergency. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Ertl. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll take 2 votes. First on the suspension of the rules. Mrs. Thomas, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Blankfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Berry?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Ertl?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Okay, very good. And on the main motion?
Mrs. Blankfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Berry?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Ertl?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Engelbrecht.
Thank you.
Also, our thanks to Mr. Foley for attending at the last meeting and his presentation as well. Letter B, Ordinance 2021-39, amending codified ordinance section 220.09 entitled Clerk of Council / Assistant Clerk of Council. This is on first reading. The sponsor is Vice Mayor Weiss. Mrs. Weiss, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This has been an issue with clerks before even Mrs. Thomas, became the clerk of council. Our charter delineates very broadly the role of council and mayor in terms of who oversees the clerk with performance reviews, with possible disciplinary action. And this just kind of clarifies it and gives each of us guidelines that are very reasonable and are attainable. So since council is not present during the workday, this gives the mayor the ability to oversee the clerk. Council is ultimately responsible for the performance reviews and appointing, but the mayor is in attendance at those performance reviews. So the mayor can have input also. And there's also, shared responsibilities. The clerk, helps with the council meetings, but at the same time, there's responsibilities that have nothing to do with council in terms of civil service and board of zoning and planning. So those shared responsibilities are really just clarified in this, so there's no confusion over, over the oversight.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mrs. Weiss. Is there any question or comment, any discussion?
Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Gould.
We've had several conversations about the balance of these things that I think are addressed in the ordinance. I think it spells out what the authorities are. I just wanted to ask and ensure, are you comfortable with the way that this is balanced from the administration standpoint? This is giving you authority to, but as we know, if you aren't comfortable with, actually exercising that authority, we'll be in the exact spot that we, have been where we're not quite clear on who's doing what. So I just wanted to kind of clarify, as you see the balance of things in here, is this something that you're comfortable with in exercising the authority put in here?
Well, I'm comfortable with going ahead and drawing some lines. I do have some questions perhaps about some of the lines that have been drawn here and how we chose certain aspects of it. When it comes to letter B, for instance, I'm not sure that we want to necessarily lock in that an assistant clerk is a part-time position by ordinance. I do think an assistant clerk may be a good idea, and I would recommend that be something that be budgeted for next year. I think that's also something that, as a matter of long-term succession planning, and also simply because the responsibilities of the clerk are immense, and this is not a commentary at all on our current clerk, but it is a lot of work and a lot of responsibility, and having a second person. We found, for instance, during the civil service process, that having a deputy clerk of council to assist in that role proved to be very helpful to the administration and also to Mrs. Thomas to more hands making light work, if you will. In addition, when it comes to discipline in letter D, I'm not sure as to why we've selected 2 days as opposed to some other number like 1 or 3 or 5 or even 2 weeks. I will tell you that as mayor of the city, having responsibility over many more employees than just the clerk of council, I have issued suspensions without pay up to 2 weeks. And here, I don't know, I would be curious to know what the rationale behind a 2-day suspension was versus some other period of time. One of my longstanding concerns about the mayor attempting to discipline a clerk of council is that the clerk of council is neither hired by nor can be fired by the mayor. And I think D attempts to resolve that, but I'm not sure what the efficacy of a 2-day suspension is. I don't know if a 2-day suspension provides corrective action. I don't know if a 2-day suspension of a clerk of council results in, it just seems to be a very interesting line to have chosen. I don't know what 2 days gets versus some other number. I don't know if we compared this to any other municipality or any other ordinance or any other, I don't know what comparative work we did. I don't know how 2 days was reached. Perhaps somebody from the committee or Mrs. Weiss could explain how we got to 2 days. A performance review, certainly the mayor providing input, that would appear to be, I think that's appropriate. I don't really have any objection there with regard to that. But, you know, I think if anything, and I know this is only on first reading, so there's going to be some time to explore, you know, what the efficacy is of a 2-day suspension, whether that actually is a helpful power to have, whether that's enough or too much, whether we should be suggesting that, I mean, if the mayor ever wanted to simply recommend termination of the city council, the clerk of council, it's not necessarily covered here, although ultimately it looks like that would be reserved for council. I guess I'd be curious to how we got to the 2 days and whether we think that's a useful power, you know, for a mayor to have to suspend a clerk of council for 2 days.
Thank you. I'll let the vice mayor or the law director respond, but when I read that, I saw it as really a collaborative process, so that if you know, to your point, I'm sure that the times that you've exercised your authority to suspend somebody for 2 weeks are probably more serious infractions of you know, our policies that really warrant it. And I can imagine that there could be such an infraction with a clerk of council at some point. But I thought when I read this that it was really striking a good balance and collaboration between the administration and council, so that if there was, you know, for instance, something that you're seeing, hey, this, I really actually think it's more than 2 days here is appropriate, that we can have a discussion about that in executive, you know, committee to have a better understanding of what you're seeing and why it deserves longer than that, up until even termination. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sure. Okay. Is there any other question or comment or response?
I mean, I would just echo Councilman Gould's, you know, you pointed out the 2 days. It was really a figure to put in there because of the collaboration, and a 2-week, you know, as you mentioned, up to a 2-week suspension would be a very, you know, harsh discipline for something that was done that was very severe. So this would give the opportunity to, if something, you know, needed to happen, it could be revisited in executive session collaboratively. I think at this point, part-time is nor has, you know, the mayor ever suggested another full-time clerk, so that would have to go into our budget discussion. So I think at this point, that's also, you know, that's appropriate. And, you know, if we have any other suggestions, you know, this is on first reading, we can talk about it.
Okay.
And
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to note, because we've had a couple comments about subsection B, that sections A and B are currently codified. Those are in our codified ordinances today. Sections C, D, and E are the amendments to the ordinance. That's entirely new syntax being added to the existing codified ordinance.
Okay. Well, thank you. That is helpful. Although, since we're exploring it, I also thought maybe that would be something we'd want to look at as well before we take this to a final vote. I would agree that a 2-week suspension is a serious suspension, but I would also say that, you know, any suspension is a significant and serious movement to make. So it may be that a 2-day suspension is more than adequate. I just wanted to make sure that we had an understanding, and I had an understanding as to how we chose a 2-day suspension, as opposed to 135 or something else, or whether simply stating that a suspension would be sufficient, but a termination would be a matter we took to council. I mean, we also have a progressive discipline procedure in the new handbook, so maybe there's some tooling that can happen there as well. And And I don't mean to in any way, demean the significance of a 2-day suspension. I don't mean that to sound as if that's not a serious thing and wouldn't be reserved for a serious infraction. But I just wanted to have a better understanding as to how it was that we got there. And if there was a particular sense of maybe the kinds of offenses that would lead to that, or what council had in mind by selecting that.
Thank you, Mayor.
So thank you for the clarifications, and happy to take additional input on that before it returns to council for a vote. I don't know if this is something that you intend to take back to committee, or if this is something you simply intend to have on for the next council agenda in 2 weeks.
So this was in committee in the
Yes.
summer.
Mhm.
So this is not going to go back into committee right now. If there are suggestions, anyone can reach out to me, and I'll speak to the law director, and we can, make some revisions for the next reading.
Well, Mayor,
Yes, Mrs. Purdy.
thank you. I have a question about E,
E, okay.
the last sentence. I think it's very important because council and the mayor do jointly supervise the clerk. The mayor is involved with the clerk at City Hall doing work, and there is that administrative side to the clerk's work. I'm just wondering about the clause, the mayor shall be obligated to attend and/or materially participate in conducting any such performance review. I think it's very important that the mayor be a part of the review, equally with council, or at least definitely be there and be participating. So I would just drop the and/or and make it and.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if that would be something palatable to the group. We've worked on this for a long time, trying to structure this supervisory capacity. But I do think it's very important to have the mayor both participating and attending.
Well, I do think that material participation could occur without actual attendance. And depending on a situation, it may not be necessary to have that strict of a mandate. I mean, my inclination would be to attend such a meeting, but I would hate also to have a situation where a review was held up simply due to the mayor not being available to physically attend a meeting when, if it turned out the review was fairly rote.
I think it's important.
But that's why I would leave the language as it is, to say obligated to attend and/or materially participate. I think if the mayor has an issue, the mayor would make a point of attending. And if the mayor simply says, no, we're good, then the need to attend may create an administrative burden that's unnecessary.
Mayor?
Yes.
Did you have anything else?
I'm processing.
Yeah.
I agree with Councilperson Pardee in that, I've had to do some research and creation around best practices for evaluation in other settings. And I know that several of you, including you, Mayor, have much more experience with that as you do that and supervise several other people. So my understanding, and correct me if you have a different understanding or just share what your experiences are, is that the collaborative process of, this is one's point of view, so this is the administration's, in this instance, this is the administration's point of view of this employee, this is council's point of view of the employee, that the synthesis that occurs between those two views in fashioning the final report is a really important process. And I would just hate to have that reduced to, this is this is a written report of our clerk, and not have the opportunity, like, well, what are you seeing? What is it like on a daily basis? Because I just think it's so valuable to understand what the administrator of the city sees on a daily basis, I see Kelly, as an example, I'm sorry, Kelly, I'm just using you as an example because you're the current clerk and we're speaking about your performance, but I see Kelly sending emails in the middle of the night. I see Kelly working all hours. I get emails at 7 o'clock in the morning, and then I get emails again at 12 or 1 o'clock in the evening. And so I see this person who's working all the day, and I'm just taking this out of the specific of Kelly, but let's say another employee, another clerk of council down the road might be doing the same thing, and the mayor says, yeah, but what you're not seeing is that at 10 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night, they're MIA. I can never get in touch with them. I don't see that. And so I think that process of talking about and synthesizing the viewpoint is important. So I do support it, and I think we should consider for the second reading removing that, or I just think it's so valuable. I really do agree with Councilperson Cardy.
Well, I would think that the mayor or any mayor, if they have that kind of concern, would make the point of attending that. I don't know that the attendance needs to be mandatory. And here, we already have some fairly strong language putting an obligation on the mayor to either attend or materially participate. If I sat down as mayor with our law director and shared my concerns, and it was a situation where it was preferable for any number of reasons why I would rather have the law director, or if some other administrative official, attend the meeting due to the mayor's unavailability or what have you, I would hate for the meeting to be held up just because the mayor simply isn't available to attend the meeting when the concerns of the administration could be effectively conveyed through another administrative official. So I would leave the flexibility in there. Part of what also has made me uncomfortable about this particular ordinance is, in some ways, in my view, we're legislating what could more properly be a charter amendment. So avoiding mandates and putting in, encouraging certain suggestions, I think, is probably a better course. Because, I wouldn't want to create a situation where somehow, the mayor is violating an ordinance by not attending a meeting. Especially if the interests of the administration are adequately represented otherwise. I think that would be something that we would want to avoid. I mean, as we legislate, my inclination would be to attend the meeting. But as we pass this sort of legislation, this is for all time or until such time as we change it. So, I would be concerned about binding a different mayor with a different leadership style, or even a different administrative setup. Say we were to adopt a chief administrative officer. That person could just as easily and perhaps even better represent the administration, depending on different circumstances in a review process like this. So, maybe we should say the mayor or the mayor's designee should appear. As long as, and the idea being that you wouldn't send just anybody, but somebody who could meaningfully participate in the process.
Mr. McConville? You recently did an analysis about participation and attendance at council meetings of the administration, specifically directors, and I believe it also included the mayor. I just want to ensure, this provision here that we're talking about, is that already encapsulated in the requirement? My understanding is that your finding was that council has the
Yeah, I don't
authority to-
remember whether that actually specified the mayor. I know it did.
Okay.
Did indicate department heads were obligated to attend. I don't remember whether it included the mayor in that mandate.
That would be, if you could check that analysis to see, because we might be speaking about something that's already encapsulated elsewhere, and if it is, then I think it becomes a...
Yeah, although a performance review is not the same as a public meeting. I don't know that we're comparing, this may be apples to oranges. But again, Mr. McConville can review that prior to the next time this is taken up.
Can we do a performance review as council and without a public meeting?
It would be just the vice mayor would be, and if there were any without a quorum, they can invite another
Okay, so
council person.
you would do that, okay. Thank you.
Okay, is there anything further on this subject? All right. Then we will consider the first reading to be had, and we can anticipate this ordinance returning on the next regular agenda. Okay. Next item is item C, Ordinance 2021-40, authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract for public health services with the Cuyahoga County Board of Health for January 1, 2022 to December 31st, 2023. And while it says on the agenda item and declaring an emergency, I'm going to recommend that this simply be done on first reading. Basically what we have is we have a county board of health that serves and has served this city as also the city's board of health. By under the Ohio Revised Code, every city in Ohio is required to have a board of health or to contract with a board of health for board of health services. In Cuyahoga County, every city except one utilizes the Cuyahoga County Board of Health as its city board of health. So this has come up obviously a lot in this last year, but anytime somebody would have a question that would be directed to the city's board of health, whether we're talking about a pandemic issue or the presence of rats or a question about a particular restaurant and its practices, the county board of health serves as the city's board of health. So in those instances, we've encouraged folks to contact the county board of health as if it's the city's board of health, because it is in fact by contract the city's board of health. So I mention this because I want the public to be aware that A, the city has a board of health in the form of the county board of health, but B, by state law, we are obligated to offer a board of health as one of the services that the city has. Undertaking this last year and a half is an understatement. There are some increases in costs, understandably. There's inflation, of course, and there's also just the realities of how taxed our Board of Health has been over the last year and a half with respect to the COVID pandemic, and also, doing all the things related to that work. So the contracts that are coming to us and to every other community in Cuyahoga County are higher than they've been. I think we know where the money's going. I think we understand why it's necessary. And in fact, we don't have an option really we can't not have a board of health. So, I think we understand though that the increase is appropriate under the circumstances. There are some things we want to make sure that we have just so in the ordinance draft. We need to commit and either pass something entering into a contract with the County Board of Health or make alternate arrangements before the end of this calendar year, so we have some time for everybody to look at and contemplate and consider what is before us. Of course, the administration's recommendation is that we execute the contract, that we pass the ordinance making the County Board of Health the city's Board of Health once again. And that said, there are some things that we just want to make sure are just so in the ordinance with respect to the time period and the obligations between the parties. So I think that covers most things. Luke, I don't know if you have anything you want to add. I kind of stole your thunder about the legal responsibility we have.
We have an obligation under state law to have a Board of Health. It would certainly be far more expensive to create our own. As a practical matter, municipalities in Cuyahoga County and other counties in Northeast Ohio don't have their own boards of health unless they're very large. I think the city of Cleveland may have its own, but there's no other municipality in Cuyahoga County that has its own Board of Health. The county is outsourcing that function to throughout the county. So I would recommend in the strongest terms possible that council approve this ordinance when it comes up for second reading.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. McConville. Are there any questions or comments regarding this ordinance?
Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Gould.
I'm not sure, maybe I missed it. Is Exhibit A, was that part of the, maybe I just missed or it came separately. Was that part of the packet?
Exhibit A being the sample contract? I don't know if that...
The portion of services, I think in the ordinance it references an attachment of Exhibit A, which is the...
Scope of work.
Yeah, like the health services, and I just would like to see, just so I have a better understanding, you know, when a citizen comes in and says, I have rats, or I have this thing, so that to know, oh, okay, well, I'm hearing that in the neighborhood, we can put that, I certainly don't need to be distributed right now, but if for the second reading, if we could see that exhibit, just the scope of services would be clear. And
certainly.
I think for $73,000, I can't imagine getting a director of the Board of Health of University Heights, should there ever be one, let alone an entire department. So I thank you for that.
And Mr. Gould, typically they do provide a report, and we can go through and see exactly how many people they've served in each area, which is always very interesting.
Yes.
So,
I know there have been a couple call-outs for rat infestations. I recall was one of them, and I'm trying to think there was another sanitary issue that they were called out for, I think, Mayor, but that would be fantastic to see, and just to know, you know, like we have our animal warden contract, you know, you call the police if you need this service, and they will come out, you know, it would be nice to know what the health department does. I do have one question for the law director. Mr. McConville, how does... When we farm out the Board of Health, does that prevent us in an emergency like we've just seen, you know, this past year, from enacting health-related things that would usually come from a Board of Health as a council? So let's say that we wanted to mandate that in every business in University Heights, masks would be required in a future emergency. Would we have the authority to do that?
Yes, and that authority is derived from the Home Rule Amendment of the Ohio Constitution. We maintain our Home Rule authority to enact any legislation that is not in conflict with general laws of the state.
So so for instance, if we decided that the county's mask advisory wasn't sufficient enough for our community, we could, you know, go...
Yeah, and in fact, you'll see a nod to the Home Rule Amendment in many of the advisories that came down from the State of Ohio Board of Health. The State of Ohio created guidelines on social distancing, mask wearing, all kinds of things, and was always careful to include in their orders that these were minimum requirements, and that if any municipality wanted to enact a stricter law, they could.
Thank you.
Yes, and also to follow up on another point, Mr. Gould, you referenced the figure of $73,788 in the ordinance, and we inadvertently have the 2021 figure, which is last year's figure at this point. One of the updates we need to make to the ordinance is what the new amounts are, which, just for the purpose of discussion and for everybody's knowledge, for 2022, that's going to go up to $83,484, and then for 2023, it'll be $91,832. Now, we'll go ahead and distribute copies of the Public Health Services Agreement together with the revised ordinance, before the next meeting. But there are some increases due to the workload that the Board of Health certainly has had, understandably. So I don't, since you did happen to mention the $73,000 figure, I did not want to let that go by without comment that is in fact an old number, and we have newer, unfortunately larger numbers, but understandably larger and justifiably larger numbers. But that will be distributed to all council members.
Thank you, Mayor.
So if there is nothing further on this item, we will consider item C to have been read on first reading for return then at the next regular city council meeting. Okay, before I read item D, I'm going to ask for a motion to remove item D from the agenda on the grounds that item D was actually previously approved by the council, but was put up with item E, because typically an item like D and E would be placed together. But as we explain item E, which reflects a change as opposed to a new contract, D was previously approved, so I would ask for a motion to remove item D from the agenda.
So moved, Mayor.
Okay, motion to remove item D by Mr. Gould. Is there a second?
Second, Mayor.
Second by, is that Mrs. Purdy?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Second by Mrs. Purdy. Mrs. Thomas, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Blankfeld,
Aye.
Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Erdl,
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Okay, item D is removed from the agenda, and we move forward to item E, which is a motion authorizing the mayor to enter into agreement with ODOT for the resurfacing and improvement of pedestrian crossings on Cedar Road, County Road 23, from South Taylor Road to South Green Road, suspending and resuming work at concrete section from Fenwick Road to Miramar Boulevard in the cities of University Heights and South Euclid, PID 112495, Cuyahoga Cedar Road. Mr. Chuney, you have the floor, sir.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mayor. This is a standard agreement between ODOT and the city. This is for the resurfacing of Cedar Road, and ODOT, this agreement puts ODOT in charge of the construction of the project. So they will be administering the project and providing all the inspection and providing 80% of the cost. The cost is estimated at $1,870,000 and some change. They're going to be providing 80% of that, leaving $400-some thousand for University Heights and South Euclid to split. Of that, we're getting $250,000 from the county. So between the two cities, we have $186,000 to split, and it's not exactly 50-50 because we have more of the road than they do. So it's about 2/3, 1/3. So it's a very good deal. If you're putting in $120,000 on a $1.8 million job, it's an excellent deal. This is a requirement by ODOT to pass this agreement with the city in order to perform the work in University Heights. The plans are done already. They are, once we pass this agreement, they're ready to sell the job. They call it sell it. They advertise and open bids, and it's scheduled for next spring to start and be all next year.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Chuney. Any questions for Mr. Chuney? If not, is there a motion to approve?
So moved, Mayor.
Okay,
I'll second.
motion to approve by Mrs. Pardee, second by Mrs. Blankfeld. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Blankfeld,
Aye.
Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Erdl,
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye. Very good. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chuney. Next is item F, Ordinance 2021-42, enacting codified ordinance section 618.021 entitled Tethering Animals, and enacting codified ordinance section 618.022 entitled Confinement, and declaring an emergency. This is on first reading. Mrs. Berry, you are the sponsor of this ordinance. Would you like the floor?
I would like Mr. McConville.
Sure.
Very good. Mr. McConville, you have the floor.
Council, this ordinance comes out of the Safety Committee meeting and is in response to some fairly specific complaints that a number of residents were making in connection with animals being tethered for very long periods of time in the backyard, running the gamut from nuisance to noise to sanitary conditions to the health and safety of the animals. The ordinance in front of you takes what I think are the best elements of ordinances from our neighboring communities, including Cleveland Heights and South Euclid, and fashions an ordinance that prohibits tethering for more than 3 hours in any 24-hour period, and also requires that tethering be done only when the owner of the pet is at home. In addition, we enact a confinement ordinance that's geared more towards we provided this ordinance to both our police chief and our prosecutor, and each had some questions and expressed an interest in perhaps meeting again with the safety committee to discuss aspects of enforcement. I think that's a good idea, since they will be the parties who will be dealing with the ordinance in the event of its violation, or any questions about the tethering of an animal that may be brought to the police department and or the prosecutor's attention. So in consultation with Councilwoman Berry, my recommendation is that this ordinance be referred back to the safety committee for a follow-up discussion with the police chief and the prosecutor, so we can hammer out any final details, and then hopefully present again at the next council meeting for passage.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Mr. McConville. With respect to your recommendation, should we make a motion, or simply, how should we refer this back to committee?
Yeah, I would prefer it be by motion.
Okay. Is there a motion then to refer ordinance 2021-42 back to the safety committee for further consideration?
Also move.
Okay. I hear a motion from Mrs. Weiss. I'll take it as a second then from Mrs. Blank.
Thank you.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion?
May I ask some questions?
Yes, Mrs. Purdy.
I'm just so glad we're doing this. I'm really grateful, and I look forward to passing it. But I had one question, just real quickly. How does this align with the statewide Dick Goddard's laws? Is this in alignment with that?
It's not inconsistent with those laws. The tethering provisions are very specific. I think it's the confinement sections that have some overlap with those laws, and that cause the chief a little bit of heartburn. I don't think it's unfair to say that. And so we just want to talk through those issues and make sure that our police department and our prosecutor are comfortable with the particular provisions and their enforceability. We may either, I anticipate some changes coming out of committee, either some paring back or some more specific enforceable remedies.
But we're adding on, we're
We're
putting
adding
on
on,
another layer.
correct,
That's
yeah.
great. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I agree, Mrs. Purdy. I mean, the goal here is to, in my view, certainly one that is protective of the animals. And we want to be sure that we are doing something that enhances that and is also enforceable and will stand up in court.
Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Gould.
And I'll just say for the record, since I said it at the public, or at the committee meeting for public safety, to the citizens that showed up, I still very much support this. The tabling, the process of tabling should not, for my part, signal that I don't want it passed. In fact, I want it to be passed, and I want, when our officers come out, for them to have bright line rules and an understanding of what they're looking for. So it's 11 o'clock at night, the dog is outside, that would hopefully touch the ordinance, that there is a National Weather Service has issued a weather emergency, a severe thunderstorm warning. That exists, the dog is outside, that is hopefully touched by the ordinance, without putting our officers in the position as they are by Goddard's law of, Goddard's law talks about there being food of a sufficient wholesomeness and quantity. And it's like, our officers don't have the capacity to go out to the site and, well, okay, that looks like a 50-pound dog, and I think a 50-pound dog should probably have cornmeal, but I really don't like a grain diet for this dog, so maybe it's not wholesome enough. It's just very difficult to enforce, which then puts them in a really difficult spot and frustrates citizens when our officers go out, don't hear barking, don't hear another clear, indication of violation of ordinance, and then have to leave because they don't have the capacity to make the type of judgment calls that Goddard's law requires them. So I'm really excited about this ordinance, and hope it can be out of committee by our next meeting. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Gould. Mrs. Weiss?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of wanted to touch on, just follow up on everybody else's comments, that this is what's so gratifying about having residents be able to contact council directly. This is something that, pretty quickly, council got together, a committee meeting, and we beefed up a law that was already on our books. And, that's why, these ordinances are important, because they can be better. They can always be better. And it's a pretty, quick process also. Hopefully the next meeting, we'll be able to pass this.
Very good. Thank you, Mrs. Weiss. We have a motion to table on the floor. Is there any further discussion? And if not, then I would call the question and have Mrs. Thomas take the roll.
Mrs. Blankfeld,
Aye.
Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Mrs. Wise,
Aye.
Mr. Erdl,
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Okay, very good. The matter is tabled and referred back to Safety Committee. Next is item G, motion authorizing mayor to accept price quote from Starfish Computer Corporation for emergency support and service from 10/1/2021 through December 31st, 2021, in an amount not to exceed $16,650. I touched on this briefly in my mayor's report, but we've been using Starfish Computer Corporation for emergency services with regard to IT. That has continued while the Ray & Associates is doing its technology review and assessment as recommended and by the Technology Advisory Commission. I have been in touch with Ray & Associates. We anticipate having a report and presentation at the next council meeting. In the meantime, we do need to continue to have emergency services in place, and this is a quote that carries us through to the end of the year. So I would ask that the council move to authorize the mayor to accept the price quote and in an amount not to exceed $16,650. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay, motion by Mr. Erdl. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Pardee. Any discussion?
Mayor,
Yes, Mrs.
we
Pardee.
have been waiting. This has been a long, slow road, and I'm so glad we're going to have a presentation. I had hoped that we would have a little information prior to the presentation. Hopefully they'll provide something to you, because we were supposed to see notes from the meeting that we had, if you recall that, from Paul.
That was from August, as I recall.
REA, yeah. But to the point of utilizing Starfish, that dollar amount breaks down to $185 a day. So I think that, from my perspective, is reasonable for emergency services to cover the city. And I'm glad that we're able to continue with them as we work through this process with REA on the audit.
Very good. Thank you, Mrs. Pardee. Any further questions or comment? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Blankfeld,
Aye.
Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Mrs. Wise,
Aye.
Mr. Erdl,
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Okay, very good. Motion carries. Next is item H, motion authorizing housing director to seek grant funding for bump outs and crosswalks located at Hillbrook and Traymore Road along Warrensville Center Road up to $300,000. Mr. Engelbrecht, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. Earlier, Kelly passed out an ordinance versus a motion. The grant is through NOACA, and part of the requirement is, instead of an actual motion from council, is they would require a resolution to let them know that we're seeking the grant funding for this proposal. So this is actually part of the city's TLCI plan, which was submitted to the city in conjunction with NOACA in 2015. The plan was the Warrensville Center Road and Cedar Road multimodal transportation plan, which is actually available online for anybody to look at for the public. It called for pretty much the restructuring of Warrensville to be more pedestrian friendly, more friendly to different modes of transportation, including scooters, which are going to be coming up, bicycles, and people just walking, being able to walk Warrensville and being able to safely cross Warrensville, which is actually 65 feet wide through the entire length of the city. So it becomes a bit harsh for a pedestrian to cross at certain areas of the city, which is part of the reason for this recommendation, which I provided to council, which is part of the plan. It shows two figures, the intersection at Traymore Road and the intersection at Hillbrook, along with a rendering, which would show bump outs, which would actually make the crossing distance shorter for pedestrians who are trying to cross Warrensville at those intersections at Hillbrook, along with Traymore Road. The other rendering would show what the intersections would look like at Warrensville and Hillbrook and Traymore with the installation of the crosswalks along with the bump outs, which again, it sort of beautifies the street. It would add grass along with plantings, which would make the street look a little bit less dominated by concrete and more beautified for folks that might be walking the street and might want to cross the street. So the grant itself has a due date of October 15th. The maximum amount that we could apply for with the grant is $300,000. I spoke with Joe Chuney about the potential cost. He's running the numbers now, but the estimated cost would be between $160,000 and $180,000. The city would be required to come up with a potential 20% match for that. So that's the grant itself. I spoke with Jim Thompson over at NOACA, who is the rep from NOACA that the city keeps in touch with, and he stated in conversation that it had been a few years since the city had applied for grant funding from NOACA for any part of the TLCI, which was passed in 2015. To date, the parts that have been passed include the bike lanes, along with the pedestrian islands, which were built along Warrensville. And the addition of these would add to the transformation of Warrensville into a true multimodal route. So I would request that council allow me to seek the funding for this grant, which again, the deadline is October 15th. The grant itself is pretty much already done. We're just waiting on a couple more pieces, including this. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Engelbrecht. I would note for the record that we did pass out a resolution 2021-43. I ended up reading letter H as a motion, but what we should probably do is
Add the resolution to the agenda by motion, and then
Yes.
consider the resolution on emergency.
Yes, exactly that. So is there a motion to add to the agenda Resolution 2021-43, a resolution seeking grant funding for bump outs and crosswalks to be located at Hillbrook and Traymore Roads along Warrensville Center Road up to $300,000 and declaring an emergency?
So moved.
Okay, motion by Mrs. Berry. Is there a second?
Second there.
Okay, I'll take the second from Mrs. Pardee. All right, so we have a motion and a second to add this to the agenda. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Blankfeld,
Aye.
Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Erdl,
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Okay, very good. We are then moving on to the new agenda item just added, which is Resolution 2021-43, a resolution seeking grant funding for bump outs and crosswalks to be located at Hillbrook and Traymore Roads along Warrensville Center Road up to $300,000 and declaring an emergency. Mr. Engelbrecht, you still, you just made your presentation, which I think we can incorporate as being part of this agenda item. Are there any questions or discussion with regard to this proposal, this matter?
Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Gould.
I just have a general question kind of regarding the housing director and for you. I, first of all, have been so impressed by Mr. Engelbrecht when it comes to everything from doing search warrants and being communicative. We get pictures of the interiors of homes that he's done, so he's clearly doing these safety visits in addition to working with the prosecutor on search warrants that we get reports on. When it came to the scooters, Mr. Engelbrecht was making the presentation on the scooters to us and was helping us through that process. And Juneteenth committee was helping to spearhead that and the city's efforts for our, we don't have Columbus Day in University Heights, but we have Juneteenth, so amen to that. And our efforts on our first Juneteenth celebration, and then here again for this NOACA grant, dealing with streets and bike lanes. And I wanted to better understand, because as we as a council, address the balance of how we're budgeting things, what positions we have at the city, and understanding how those are working together. How do you envision the housing department and the director of the housing department doing these different tasks? It seems that Mr. Engelbrecht is kind of doing a lot of things that I don't see generally in housing, and I'm wondering, is it just his personal expertise, or is it kind of a vision for that position that you see for these kind of broader activities?
Well, yeah, he is the Director of Housing and Community Development.
Okay, so it's the community development portion that kind of is going into the streets and
Yes.
the scooters?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's all under the community development umbrella. And as Mr. Engelbrecht has been demonstrating, he is proficient in both
Fantastic.
those areas.
In all of them,
And getting better every day.
Perhaps it is the embodiment of what always should have been, but it felt new to me, and so I just wanted to understand, perhaps the vision for the position. Thank you so much.
Yes, no, I would say that what you're seeing is consistent with the vision for the position, and Mr. Engelbrecht is fulfilling it. Didn't mean to have the job interview or the job review here this evening, but here we are. Keep up the good work, Mr. Engelbrecht, and thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to provide that clarity to the community, that Mr. Engelbrecht is not merely a housing director, but is also here doing community development, and programs like you've described, from the scooters to this, are consistent with that piece. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Mayor, unless there's any other, I'll make a motion to pass Resolution 2021-43, seeking grant funding for bump outs and crosswalks to be located at Hillbrook and Traymar along Warrensville Center Road, up to $300,000 on emergency.
Okay, we have a motion to adopt on emergency Resolution 2021-43 by Mr. Gould. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Berry. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas will take two votes. First is on the suspension of the rules.
Mrs. Langfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Berry?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Ertl?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
And on the main motion.
Mrs. Langfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Berry?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Ertl?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Motion carries. Thank you, council. Thank you, Mr. Engelbrecht. Okay, next item is item I, motion declaring 3910 Faversham Road a public nuisance. And Mr. Engelbrecht, you're still at the podium, so you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. The Housing Department executed on a search warrant for the address at 3910 Faversham. I believe it was September 22nd. Inspector Silas Brown had tried repeatedly to get in touch with the owner of the property. The property was unkempt and was pretty much in derelict condition. The city has had to go out numerous times to cut the grass, both the front and the backyard. There was an abandoned car in the driveway, along with broken out windows, including one of the glass block windows in the basement, along with window panes on the third floor. So just based on that, we sought to do an interior inspection, and were not able to get in touch with the owner of the property, who we found out is actually in a nursing home. The property itself is $22,000 behind in taxes. So we sought a search warrant and executed on the search warrant September 22nd. We found that the front door was open to entry, and there was evidence of squatting inside the house, along with potential hoarding. The property itself had dog feces on the first floor, along with the second, or the stair landing, the first landing up the stairs. And the property itself, even with the dog feces and the hoarding, there was evidence of a squatter being inside the property, not just because of the property being open to entry, but also because of liquor that was left in the house and cigarettes and so on and so forth. So just based on the health conditions, along with there was a problem with mold in the basement. You could see that there was water coming through the walls and through the floor. And I submitted to council photos of the interior of the property after we did the interior inspection. The property is now secure. And I'm looking, or I would request the council approve a motion declaring this property to be a public nuisance.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Engelbrecht. Any questions for Mr. Engelbrecht?
Yes, Mayor, I have one.
Okay, I'll go with Mrs. Blankfeld.
So we talk regularly. You keep identifying more and more and more of these properties, and I'm grateful that you're doing that. How long was this one in this condition? Do we know?
I believe 3 years.
So 3 years this has been languishing in a public nuisance and nobody identified it. Thank you for this. I thank you for this.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mrs. Blankfeld. Mrs. Weiss.
Yeah, thank you. Also, I want to commend you on the job that you've been doing so far. Like to date, since when you've started, how many homes have we declared a nuisance?
This would be the second property. The rest of the properties that I've been inside, there's certain things that I'm looking for when doing an interior inspection. It's not just the property being open to entry. We're looking for potential structural issues with the property, but primarily looking at the roof along with the foundation. Those are the main reasons as to why, at least in my eyes, a house could be or should be considered a nuisance, as if it's structurally unsound. Everything else, if there's broken out drywall, if it's missing a kitchen sink, if there's a grill inside the house, like with the property on South Belvoir, all of that can be addressed. It's more so, is the property structurally sound, or is the property a health hazard for kids in the neighborhood, folks that are just unaware of the potential condition of the property. So this would only be the second, even though we've been inside maybe 8 to date.
Yeah, I couldn't remember because we got all the pictures and I couldn't remember how many we actually declared nuisance, but thank you.
You're welcome.
Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Gould.
Mr. Engelberg, you mentioned this property was $22,000 in tax arrears. I recently learned of a community member who, as we're coming out of this pandemic, has lost her home due to foreclosure. Are there any things that you could think of that would help us have some type of radar for these homes that may be able to be saved, I think this is a nuisance. You've convinced me of that. But there's also a community member who's in the hospital who is behind in taxes, and I have a lot of compassion for that citizen's condition and position. I wish there was a way that we could have come in with resources earlier on in that process. Are there programs or are there ideas that are kind of out there right now that would allow us to have a better understanding of properties that we could help bring resources to before having to go through this process?
There are resources available to the public, but those resources are very limited. There's repair help for people. There's a grant through the state HWAP, that's the Homeowners Weatherization Program, which deals with weather-related concerns. If it's a furnace, they could fix the furnace. If it's a wall insulation that needs to happen, they could do that as well. The grant, I believe, is for around $7,000, and it's a grant, but of course it's based on income. There's also help through various loans. There's one of the places that I used to send people to was the Hebrew Free Loan Foundation in Beechwood. They could give a $5,000 loan to somebody at 0% as long as they could find one cosigner. That's like getting money from a friend and just paying it back. You know, so there is help out there that people could apply for and try and see if they could qualify for. But when it comes to the property taxes, that's another issue, as we all know. It doesn't take long to fall behind, even by $22,000. That's 2-3 years, and that's it. So it's tough. The department has begun to again consider going door to door and looking at every single house in the city and trying to get in touch with the owners about their condition, seeing if they need some help, and concentrating on some of the harder hit parts of the city that you know, that people might need more help for. But it's not easy. It's not simple. And a lot of it is a case-by-case basis, where you know, everybody's situation is different. We might have somebody, like I spoke with a gentleman who recently, within the last year, broke both of his legs, is now on disability, is now, you know, he can't work anymore, and he's falling behind on taxes. He's $14,000 behind at this point. How is he able to age in place? Like, that's a whole nother conversation that I don't have the answer for right now. But it's a conversation that needs to be had.
I'd love to see Councilperson Blankfeld's committee, you know,
Yes.
have a conversation about this, because we've all been inside.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, the tight-knit, you know, I can see you from my windowness of University Heights can be a positive or a negative. You know, sometimes that dog out there is you know, did his business on my yard, but it's also a way that we as community members can see our neighbors, can make sure they're okay. I haven't seen this elder leave their home in several days. You know, I can go over and knock. I see the newspaper comes in every Sunday and it hasn't come in for 2 weeks. You know, what's happening here? But we've been inside in our own spaces for so long that my fear is that we will hear more stories like that, where over this past 2 years, especially when we've had eviction moratoriums, and Mayor, you've brought this up yourself, you know, that we won't have the same foresight that we usually would have, because we've been in a very different environment. And if there's anything we can do to create this like system of seeing, you know, these properties just went into, you know, another 6-month period of tax arrearage.
And it didn't happen overnight.
Yeah, and it didn't happen, you know, so now we're 6 months, and now we're a year out, and we can go and see. Maybe it limits the number of doors you have to knock on, but it's just one indicator. Or knowing from the clerk of courts, you know, heads up University Heights, here are your foreclosure filings for, you know, the weeks. Something with Cuyahoga County, you know, on that. But I don't know what it is, but I think it's worth a discussion.
No, I was thinking the exact same thing. You and I have worked together so well on you know, the things we're going to put our heads together on this. Absolutely.
Because there are areas like my side of the city, especially, you know, Jackson University or North Cliff, where I am, where, you know, our housing stock is a little different, our income is a little different, and there are places where it feels like, you know, 1 or 2 homes in a neighborhood can turn into 3, 4, 5 in a neighborhood. And in a city, University Heights size, especially when you're talking about subdivisions of a city, 3 or 4 homes really makes an impact on a neighborhood. So that's from you know, my perspective, where I'd love to see. So thank you so much, Mayor.
You're welcome, Mr. Gould. Okay, so do we have a motion to declare 3910 Faversham Road a public nuisance?
I so move, Mayor.
Very good. Motion by Mrs. Blankfeld. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Gould. Any discussion on the motion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Blankfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Berry?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Engelbrecht, for all your work on this. Item J is a motion to enter executive session for the purpose of discussing legal proceedings, personnel, and real estate matters. The administration has no matters to bring to the council at this time in executive session. So we would then turn to the director's reports. First is Finance. Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mayor. Just want to let the council know we did file the tax rate resolution that was approved the last meeting with the county. County also has all the appropriate file information for all the special assessments that were approved at the meeting in September. We'll be working on closing out, I still have to close out the month of August, and then we'll move on to October. One of the folks in the finance office has been out for a while. We made some correcting entries, so I got to wait for her to come back, which is tomorrow. So we will get the August report out. Everything looks good. And as I said in the Finance Advisory meeting before this, we'll have an appropriation ordinance for council for the next meeting, not only to appropriate the potential spending out of the ARPA monies, but there's some corrective shuffling that needs to go on. And then we'll probably have one more cleanup ordinance in December, which is a usual and customary practice to balance all the accounts. So when we send it down to the county for the final certificate, we'll be in balance everywhere. But other than that, things are going well.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Any questions for Mr. Kennedy? Okay, thank you, sir. Director of Law, Mr. McConville.
I have no report this evening, Mayor.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Public Safety, Police, Chief Rogers. Okay, no report from Chief Rogers. Public Safety, Fire, Chief Perko.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. Just wanted to reiterate and thank everybody for coming out to the open house Sunday. It was definitely well attended and much appreciated. Secondly, just a reminder that we are in hydrant flushing season throughout the month. It started today, so if any residents in the community see fire personnel actively flushing out in your street, we recommended them to run their water clear before doing any dishes, running a dishwasher or a laundry machine. That's all I have to report.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Chief Perko. Any questions for Chief Perko? I'll just say, echoing some other comments earlier, thank you, Chief Perko, for all the work that you and your staff did with respect to the fire open house. It was a high-quality event that brought a lot of people out in the community. I know how much they appreciated seeing their firefighters and seeing the equipment and learning more about what the agency does. So thank you for that. Okay. Service, Mr. Picorni.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. I just wanted to report that the fall tree pruning program, which was approved by Council, is underway. We should have the pruning and removals and stump grinding done sometime in November. Next meeting, I'll have the recommendation for a contract for tree planting. Bids were just opened this past Friday. We haven't had a chance to put together bid tabulation yet. And the last item is, again, a reminder on fall leaf collection that will start October 18th. So grass bags, lawn leaf bags until October 18th, and then you can start putting out piles on the tree lawn. And that concludes my report.
It's the most wonderful time of the year.
I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you, Mr. Picorni. Any questions for Mr. Picorni? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Picorni. We will move then to building. Mr. White.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. Just wanted to give my September report on building permits. There were 83 residential permits issued, and there were 9 commercial building permits issued. That's into my report.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. White. Any questions for Mr. White? All right, very good. Thank you. Housing and Community Development. Mr. Engelbrecht.
Yes, thank you. Within the last 2 weeks, the department signed criminal complaints against 6 properties, which will proceed to court. Those are the properties that are located at 13485 Cedar. That's the parking lot close to the intersection of Cedar and Taylor. Rental properties at 4426 Silsby, 13606 Cedar, 4461 Groveland, and 3485 Northwood, along with property which is not rental. It's I believe it's vacant at this point, 4056 Meadowbrook. We continue to receive about 200 calls a week. Within the last 2 weeks, the department has done 32 point-of-sale inspections, along with over 20 rental inspections. And regarding Juneteenth, there will be another meeting coming up, which I still have to schedule next week for the folks that have been involved. It's a group that consists of both neighborhood residents and business owners who want to see a great celebration for Juneteenth in the city.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Engelbrecht. Any questions for Mr. Engelbrecht? Seeing none, thank you, sir. Next, we have the city engineer, Mr. Chuney.
No report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chuney. No report. Next, we have communications and civic engagement. Mr. Cook could not be here, but he has a report. I will read it. And when I say I, that would be Mr. Cook. So thank you for your patience and understanding as I am not available this evening due to a family matter. Please accept this submitted report in my absence. Fall Fest returns on Sunday. After a successful event in 2019, University Heights Fall Fest returns to Walter Stinson Community Park on Sunday, October 10th from 1 to 5 p.m. The event will feature over 50 artists and vendors from across Northeast Ohio, activities for the kids, circus performers, and a concert from 80s dance band Back to the Future. And with the Cleveland Browns kicking off at 4:05 p.m. on Sunday versus the Los Angeles Chargers, one can attend all of Fall Fest and be back in plenty of time for the second half of the game. At this family event, kids will be entertained by Balloons by Blake and bubble artist Dr. You Are Awesome. Youngsters will also have the opportunity to paint pumpkins. Come to the Fall Fest hungry as food trucks Sticks and Buns, Barra de Taco, and Cleveland Cookie Dough Company will be on site. Get a late lunch or get food to go and take it home to watch the Browns go 4-1. We've ramped up our social media and earned media effort this week to get the word out about the event. And as for this afternoon, the weather forecast for Fall Fest is 77 degrees and sunny. And that concludes Mr. Cook's report. Hope to see you all at the Fall Fest. Economic Development, Mrs. Drucker is out of state this week, and there is no report. We will now turn to the reports from standing committees. Building and Housing, Mrs. Blankveld.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We are in the process of scheduling a Building and Housing Committee meeting to explore a possible ordinance regulating Airbnb properties in our community. And now we can add to that, working with Mr. Engelbrecht to find a way to start identifying distressed properties and those properties that may still have residents in them that are in need of our attention or assistance. Okay. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mrs. Blankfeld. Community Outreach, Mrs. Purdy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm very grateful that we have residents who have stepped up to co-chair the Technology Advisory Commission. Thank you for appointing them. We look forward to getting a meeting on the agenda, and then we'll have more to report about Tech Advisory. That's it.
Very good. Thank you, Mrs. Purdy. Economic Development, Mr. Rock is not here. Is there a report from anybody on the committee? If not, we'll say there's no report, and we'll go to Finance, Mrs. Weiss.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Prior to this meeting, we had a Finance Committee meeting with a joint advisory staff or committee to discuss the use of the ARPA funds, which are COVID funds from the federal government that trickle into, I believe, the state. We will be allocating part of that money toward fixing part of our sewer systems, and we'll be donating a small portion of that to local food banks.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mrs. Weiss. Next, Recreation, Mr. Ertl.
No report, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ertl. Safety, Mrs. Berry.
We are hoping to schedule a meeting next
week, hopefully the 11th or the 13th. So I asked my colleagues to let me know which date is best for them so that we can find out from the prosecutor and the chief their concerns about the tethering ordinance so that we can hopefully bring it back to council at our next meeting.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mrs. Berry. Mrs. Thomas, if you would make note that we should also coordinate the schedules of Prosecutor Scalise and Chief Rogers for that meeting. Thank you. Service and Utilities, Mr. Gould.
Thank you, Mayor. No report.
No report. And Committee of the Whole, Mrs. Weiss.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just have a brief statement on behalf of myself and council in consultation with the law director so as not to be in conflict with any sunshine laws. I'm just going to make a very brief statement regarding negative campaigning. We who are currently elected to City Council value our community's diversity, fellowship, and goodwill. We do not value negative campaigning or personal attacks, and those of us currently elected were elected without using those tactics in our campaigns. We believe campaigns for elected officials in University Heights should focus on issues, ideas, opportunities, and vision. And this is signed by myself, Councilwoman Berry, Councilman Phil Ertl, Councilman Gould, Councilman Rock, Councilwoman Pardee, and Councilwoman Blankfeld. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Weiss. We are now at the conclusion of this evening's agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, motion by Mr. Gould. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Mrs. Berry. Mrs. Thomas, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Blankfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Berry?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Ertl? Aye. Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Very good. We are adjourned. We'll see you back on October 19th. Thank you.